Leadership in sports is one of the most misunderstood parts of the entire athletic experience. Many coaches and even athletes assume that leadership comes from hype, pregame speeches, or being the loudest voice in the locker room. They assume that great leadership on the field has to include volume and raw emotion. But as I grew older and I competed at higher levels and later spent years leading in military special operations, I realized something important. Effective leadership has very little to do with volume or hype. It begins with influence, composure, and credibility. Every great leader I've ever known was someone whose presence immediately elevated the performance and the focus of the people around them. When teammates step onto the field with an athlete who embodies this kind of leadership, they naturally calm down, focus better, and play with far greater confidence. The environment feels clearer, more controlled, even if the scoreboard and the crowd and the stakes are intense. Today I'll explain why that happens, where leadership actually comes from, and why the athletes who lead best rarely look like or sound like the stereotypical loud leaders we hear about in sports. My goal is simple: to give you a clearer, more scientific, more practical understanding of what leadership really is, how it forms, and how you can build it on your team. Welcome back to the Leadership Lab. I'm Evan McGugan, former Division I lacrosse player, a United States Naval Academy graduate, and a former SEAL officer. I spent more than a decade leading teams in high-pressure environments where clarity, composure, and influence weren't optional. They were basic requirements of the job. Today, I use that background combined with leadership psychology, sports performance research, to help athletes, coaches, and professionals learn how to think clearly under pressure, how to build trust, and how to influence without needing any official authority. This episode is meant to teach athletes the real mechanics of leadership. If you play a sport, you already know that most leadership advice out there is vague, emotional, and probably just unrealistic. You hear phrases like step up or lead by example or hold your teammates accountable without anyone actually explaining what that looks like on the practice field, in the locker room, or in the fourth quarter. And so I want to give you something better. By the end of this video, you'll understand where leadership comes from, how people decide who to follow, how trust is built on a team, why certain athletes rise as leaders, and how you can become the kind of player that teammates naturally follow, even if you're not the team captain. To understand leadership, we first need to understand where it comes from. Leadership didn't begin in companies or on sports teams. It began thousands of years ago, long before there were coaches or captains or offices or titles. Human beings survived by working together. We hunted in groups, we protected one another, we built shelters together, we solved problems together. We formed tribes not because we wanted the community in the way that we think about community today, but because it was necessary. In our earliest days as a species, unity was a survival mechanism. And human beings are social creatures, whereas most animals can live alone, we cannot. Our species survived and thrived because we cooperate and coordinate. We think together, we act together, and we make meaning together. That is the root of leadership. Think of it this way. An early hunting party needed someone who could see the terrain clearly, read danger, and coordinate the group. A defensive unit in lacrosse or football needs someone who can see the field clearly, read threats, and coordinate the slide or rotation for the team. The environments are clearly different, but the psychological function underneath them is nearly identical. Someone has to create clarity so the group can act together. And the same pattern exists today. Whenever a group gathers on a field, in a locker room, or a classroom, or in a workplace, there will be a moment where someone says, we should do this thing. And the group has to decide whether to follow that person. And that decision always comes down to one thing: trust. If the group trusts the person who proposed the idea, then the next question becomes, how will they accomplish the task? In that single moment, the moment the group evaluates trust is the birthplace of the leader and follower dynamic. Sometimes that relationship is formal, like in an office or on a coaching staff, and sometimes it's informal, as it is for athletes. But the logic stays the same. Trust is the foundation of influence and therefore the gatekeeper of leadership. When people work together, they follow a predictable sequence. They decide what they want to do, they decide how they're going to do it, and then they take action. New problems appear, and then they decide again what to do next and who will guide the next decision. This repeated cycle created leadership as a natural part of human psychology. Leadership exists because human beings can't survive or progress or succeed without coordinated effort. And every group needs someone to guide that coordination, and that's always been true. Every huddle on the sideline or after your opponent scores a goal is a smaller version of this ancient cycle. A team gathers, someone proposes a plan, and then the group silently decides whether to trust that voice. Then they act together. This is leadership in real time. When a group moves through this decision-making cycle over and over again, there are certain individuals who will naturally rise to the surface. And this emergence is not accidental or random. It follows a predictable psychological pattern. But before we examine how leaders behave, we need to understand why these individuals rise in the first place. In every group, some people step forward, not because they were chosen, not because they were loud, and not because they wanted a title, but because they possess specific traits that make others look to them during moments of uncertainty. The first trait that people gravitate towards during moments of uncertainty is self-confidence. That means that you believe you can accomplish meaningful goals. Athletes feel it, teammates feel it, coaches feel it. People trust someone who clearly trusts himself or herself. The second trait that people gravitate towards during moments of uncertainty is dominance. Now, dominance doesn't mean aggression or trying to overpower people. Dominance means the willingness to speak up when others hesitate, to offer ideas when others stay quiet, and to stand firm when those ideas are tested. It's calm command. It's the ability to stand your ground mentally when the environment becomes loud or pressure. The third trait that people gravitate towards during moments of uncertainty is intelligence. Intelligence includes handling complexity, reading situations, understanding people, and learning quickly from mistakes or stress. On a team, this looks like an athlete who can anticipate what will happen next, who senses where the breakdown's coming from, and who can adjust on the fly. People who show these three traits are usually the individuals who are looked to first when decisions have to be made. That's how leadership emerges naturally, whether the group is a primitive tribe or a modern sports team. Once someone begins to emerge as a leader, the next question is how do they actually influence others to move towards a goal? If influence is the percentage likelihood that someone will comply with your request or follow your example, then that matters even more when you have no formal authority. And this is the exact situation that athletes are in. So how do athletes stack the deck in their favor so that their fellow teammates trust them enough to follow their lead and comply with their requests? The foundation of trust, and therefore influence, comes from three things. You have character, credibility, and competence. Character is who you are when no one is watching. And I think most people have heard that definition before, but I think it's also your morals, which is what you believe to be right or wrong, and your ethics, which is how you decide what is right and wrong, and then your habits. It's the proof that you can make the best choices you can, even when it's inconvenient. When people believe that you will make the best decisions you can with the information that you have in the way that benefits the mission, the team, and themselves and yourself, all at the same time, they will trust you more. Competence is your technical skill. It's your ability to perform well, make sound decisions, and carry out the responsibilities at game speed. However, competence does not develop on its own. Your character determines your competence because your character determines your habits, and your habits determine how consistently you practice, prepare, and refine your craft, whatever it is. Competence then shapes your credibility. Credibility is how people see you. It's the amount of evidence that you are who you say you are or will do what you say you can do. It's built on visible track record of good decisions, reliable execution, and steady performance under pressure. It's the degree to which people trust you, trust your judgment, and believe that you'll show up with consistency and attempt to make the best decision, perform the best you can on good days or on bad days. And in this way, character creates your habits, and habits create your competence, and competence creates your credibility. That is the chain of trust that people in general and your teammates specifically will follow. And when these three qualities are strengthened, then trust will grow. And when trust grows, people will follow you more, whether you ask them to or not. And so the loudest athlete is not the leader. The most trusted athlete on the field is the leader. This understanding becomes especially important in sports because leadership in sports is widely misunderstood. A lot of athletes believe that leadership comes from hype or emotion or effort. They think that playing harder or yelling louder means that they're leading, especially young athletes. But leadership in athletics is not about how much you talk. It's about how much the team trusts you, how closely they watch you, and how willing they are to follow your example in practice and put their trust in you when the game's on the line. On a team, trust is very visible. Trust is choosing who to pass the ball to in a critical moment because you believe that player will stay composed. Trust is accepting a teammate's or coach's correction in practice without becoming defensive because you know that that person wants the group to win. Trust is hearing a specific voice in a timeout and feeling your breathing slow down and your focus sharpen. Athletes don't have any formal authority over one another. Only coaches can change lineups and adjust playing time and discipline teammates. So athletes have to lead and influence without the power to reward or punishment. And so that means trust is everything when leading in sports. Because athletes lead without authority, teams naturally create their own leadership structure based on who they trust. And this is where we see different types of leaders emerge inside of a team and why each type matters. Understanding these types can give athletes and coaches a clear roadmap for the kind of influence that they want to build on their team. Athletes trust their teammates for one of two reasons. The first type of leader that athletes place their trust in and follow is the locker room leader. This is the athlete who influences others through their character and maturity and reliability and consistency. Teammates trust this person because they carry themselves with discipline and integrity. They set the tone in the locker room, in the weight room, and at practice. They hold themselves to a high standard even if they're not the best player. And that, over time, becomes the cultural baseline for everyone else on the team. They're the teammate that makes you compete with each other for playing time in practice, but is an integral part of the culture that makes your team cooperate with each other to win on game day. Locker room leaders make sure that the starting line is earning their spots and the rest of the roster is preparing them for game day the best that they can. The second type of leader in sports is the playmaker. This is the athlete who leads through execution, sound decision-making, and rock-solid composure. Their level of play elevates the skill of everyone else on the team, and they make the right read under pressure. They solve problems quickly, with conviction, when the game speeds up. They are the go-to players when the game's on the line. The rarest leaders in sports combine both forms. They're the cultural baseline and the playmaker all in one. They show up with integrity, provide emotional stability, and they perform with exceptional technical execution. They carry the team identity and uphold the standards while also providing the clarity, reliability, in chaotic moments. They're the teammates who are steady in the locker room and sharp on the field. And those athletes become anchors for the entire program that they're a part of. Recognizing the different types of leaders is helpful when you're a coach or a player, but it still doesn't explain why certain athletes hold steady under pressure while others collapse. And to understand that difference, we need to explore something a little more deeper than behavior or personality. We need to look at identity, because identity is the foundation for every leadership action that comes afterward. Identity shapes how you think, how you react, and how you carry yourself. When stress increases, most athletes never define their identity. They simply react to emotion, pressure, or fear, and then they hope that their best self appears when the moment's big. But under pressure, athletes rarely rise to the occasion. They fall back to their level of identity and their training and their systems. Identity shows itself in very, very specific ways. It shows up in how you respond to a turnover. Do you drop your head and disconnect, or do you sprint back and reset? It shows up in how you react to coaching. Do you get defensive when you're corrected, or do you adjust quickly? It shows up in how you treat younger teammates or teammates that are struggling. Do you ignore them, or do you help them understand the standard and help them get there? Identity is the anchor for your behavior. When you consciously define who you intend to be as an athlete and who you intend to be as a leader, you train your mind to act from principles and define behaviors instead of emotion. Identity becomes real through personal standards. Athletes don't follow speeches once the work starts. They follow standards. And standards create predictability, and predictability creates trust. And when your behavior is consistent, teammates can orient themselves around you. You become a stable, more reliable, and you become someone who they can count on, especially when the environment is high pressure and chaotic. Standards in sports show up in very specific ways. The team knows who will show up on time, who will never cut a rep, who will run all the way through the line. The team knows which athlete will keep competing when the game's out of reach and which athlete will lose interest. The team knows who will stick to the game plan when tensions rise. Standards determine your emotional floor. They decide how reactive you are, how well prepared you are, and how you behave when you're frustrated, tired, or under pressure. Standards are not created through talking about them once, though. They are created through daily choices that your teammates see over and over again, and they are the foundational choice of what builds trust. Standards alone aren't enough, though. Standards create expectations, but habits create consistency, and habits are where leadership becomes more automatic instead of emotional. They're the link between who you say you are and who your teammates experience you to be. And this is why we have to move from standards to habits. Habits decide how quickly you reset after a mistake, how you communicate under stress, how you control your breathing, and how you transition between drills and plays and periods in a game. In a sports environment, leadership habits might look like taking no more than 3 seconds to mentally reset after an error. It might mean checking your body language after a play to make sure it signals calm and readiness and composure. It might mean using a simple breathing pattern when you feel a momentum swing, or clearly communicating calls during fast breaks or defensive rotations. The point is, when your habits are stable, the team becomes more stable. And when your habits fall apart, the team becomes more unsettled. And so teammates will often mirror the habits of the athletes that they respect the most, which means that your habits don't stay yours for very long. They spread, especially when you're a top-level athlete. It's your habits that prepare you for the environments where leadership matters most, because pressure always exposes whether your habits are real or imagined. When the game speeds up, emotions rise, and athletes with highly trained habits remain composed while others become reactive. This is the moment where leadership in sports becomes undeniable. Pressure separates surface level leadership from genuinely effective leadership in sports or in any other industry. Many athletes lose emotional control, rush decisions, tighten up mentally, and let their communication fall apart, while the great leaders on the field stay steady and bring clarity to the situation. Great leaders become calmer and more deliberate and more composed. They regulate their physiology instead of letting stress take over. They use simple reset routines such as breath work or phrases or physical cues to bring themselves back to clarity. When you can regulate yourself, you can help regulate the team. So athletes look for the most composed person in the environment and take emotional cues from that person. And if that person is you, then you are leading whether you intend to or not. Staying composed under pressure is essential, but composure alone is not the full picture of leadership. Great leaders know how to adjust how they lead based on what the moment demands. This requires shifting between different modes of leadership, each with a very specific purpose, and understanding these modes show how to lead more intelligently, not just more intensely. Some moments require energy and inspiration, and this is what's known as charismatic leadership. It's the most helpful when the locker room is flat before a rivalry game or when the team has lost intensity during a long practice. Some moments require values and identity and standards, and this is ideological leadership. It's most necessary when standards start to slip, when teammates begin to argue, or when the culture feels off. Some moments require clarity and structure, and this is pragmatic leadership. It's the most essential during blown defensive rotations or poor offensive possessions, special teams breakdowns, or late game situations where the next systems level decision determines the outcome. Leaders who can shift between these modes respond way more effectively to the demands of leadership than those who rely on a single approach for every situation. Once you understand how each leadership mode functions, you can step back and you can see that the entire system is a unified process. Leadership is not a single trait or a single behavior. It's a layered progression that begins with identity, develops through personal standards, becomes automatic through habits, and reveals its strength under pressure. And it matures through the ability to shift leadership modes based on what the moment demands. When these elements are aligned, the full blueprint for high-level athletic leadership becomes clear. You become a steadying force on your team. You become a source of trust and composure. You become the kind of player that teammates follow because they want to, not because they are told to. If you're wondering where to start, begin with one simple step. Identify what kind of player you want to be. Decide on one standard which supports that identity that you will hold no matter what. It might be your response after a mistake. It might be your body language, it might be your effort and conditioning, or it might be your communication on the field. Whatever it is, commit to that standard until your teammates know that it is who you are. That is the first brick to building effective leadership architecture when you're an athlete. Now that the entire system's clear, we can finish with one of the most important truths that I've learned about leadership. Leadership is not something you turn on for the big moments. It's something that you live and build day by day through the way you think, through the way you behave, through the way you prepare and respond. Every team remembers the player who brought order to chaos. Every program remembers the athlete who made everyone else better around them. And when you become the player whose presence raises the standard of every practice, meeting, game, lift, you become the kind of leader who lasts. And effective leaders in sports don't rely on volume and emotion. The athletes who remain steady and consistent are the ones who earn long-term trust. Those who stay composed under pressure are the ones who ultimately identify and shape the success of entire programs. If you want to continue developing these skills and learn the science behind leadership under pressure, join my email list using the link in the description. Every week I send one practical research-backed lesson designed to help leaders build influence, composure, and credibility. If you're serious about becoming a leader your teammates trust, that's your next step.